Good afternoon and welcome to Campus Literature Week 2025. This afternoon we have readings from 5 of our students past and present, and we are going to start with Miss Sarah Gafoor, who is a current MFA student. It's her first year. Sarah?
Hi, good day. I'm Sarah. For my reading, I'm doing a little short story I did called The Memories of My Granduncle. So, I remember my granduncle. Sometimes my brother and I would talk about our old memories of him. From what we remember, he was a tall, lanky, bald old man. The rough stubble of his beard was silver, and the wrinkles next to his eyes creased deeply whenever he smiled. He used to smile a lot, his gold teeth being front and center the whole time. We barely ever saw him, since he lived so far away. Nobody wanted to make the drive out to that little rural town 2 hours away from urban life unless it was a special occasion, or whenever he complained he hadn't seen me and my brother for a while. Worse yet, because he lived on the far outskirts of that little farm and village, he'd meet us where the asphalt road ended and walk us through the slim dirt path that had been beaten into tall, untamed grass. Granduncle's house wasn't anything special, not even when I had a child's eyes. It had been a small flat house made of brick and concrete, with glass louvers that creaked and stuttered when you tried to open and close them. The whole house was pale blue, and I have no idea if that was intentional or if the sun had bleached the vibrancy off the chip-in paint. Inside was as plain as could be. Granduncle had said he didn't have any need for any fancy city thing, when my brother had asked him why he didn't have a TV. The last time we went to see him, he had said there was enough to do around the yard and he didn't need a TV to entertain him. My granduncle was right. The coop of chickens and ducks he kept just a little ways off from the house used to entertain me and my brother for hours. When it wasn't that, granduncle would take us into the bushland and teach us which grass was really a cooking herb or which mushroom was safe to eat. Then he'd bring it back to his house and teach us how to cook a stew or soup with what we foraged. Sometimes he used to go out to the coop and kill a chicken for meat to add. The last time we visited, he let my brother watch how he killed the chicken and plucked the feathers off. He'd promised to teach him on our next visit, but we had never seen him since then. But what always I looked forward to the most was the vast tall grass around his home, or the ducks that used to make noise very early in the morning. Instead, it was this marshland that had been on his property. It didn't go far, but it was big and deep enough that Uncle had a rickety old wooden boat, and he would take out to catch fish or two every now and again to fry. Sometimes he wouldn't even fish if we were there. He would just pile us into a little boat and row out to the middle of the murky water and let us fascinate ourselves. He'd grin, laugh, and entertain our dozens of questions. Every time we would point to a bright-colored flower growing on the waterlogged banks or rims around the marsh, he'd always have an answer. It was a bird's foot trefoil flowers and yellow flag irises that swayed gently in the wind when we pointed to it. And it was the red twig dogwood that he'd tell us to stay clear of because he had an allergy to that one, and he didn't want to find out if we had the same allergy the hard way. My brother remembers more than me, and sometimes we compare what we know. But my memories has gaps and cracks that he fills in easily. He remembers when granduncle would tilt his head back and laugh when I'd proudly show him my hard-caught bait. I don't remember that. Although the hazy memories were still beautiful, I had only remembered the profound heaviness that would press down around the marsh. It made the air heavy, and it had made me sick if we stayed out too long. Or maybe it was due to the slight but constant rocking of the little wooden boat, as me and my brother leaned from one side to the next, peering down into the green-brown water on either side. But now I think that granduncle had felt that oppressiveness too. That had to be why he'd gone stone-faced when I pointed into the water and asked him about a patch of algae floating by. He'd looked over himself at the mop of thin black tendrils drifting aimlessly through the water towards us. Granduncle hadn't answered my question. Instead, he had grabbed the paddles on his boat and took us back to land, ushering us back into the house, giving us hurried promises that he'd teach us about a new type of card game with the one deck he had. He'd made good on his promise, even when he kept throwing backward glances to the one window in his dining room where the louvers couldn't shut completely. I don't think it was my childish imagination either, because my granduncle brought it up to a shopkeeper in town. The shopkeeper used to make homemade vanilla ice cream that was more sugar than vanilla flavor, but it was the only special treat granduncle could get us. My brother had been sitting on the dusty steps of the shops, and I was standing right behind him as we watched an older couple climb out of a hired maxi, dressed in black and faces severe. Behind me, I have the vaguest memory of hearing granduncle bantering with the shopkeeper behind me as the shopkeeper counted out the change. Just like everybody else in the village, the shopkeeper had been old. Despite being old, her mind was still sharp and her speech was quick, but she'd stumble on her words occasionally and her lips would tremble for a second before she continued speaking again. From my memory, she was a nice old lady who used to give me and my brother a piece of bubblegum for free whenever granduncle came to buy her too sweet ice cream for us. My brother said she had scary eyes and used to glare at us, but I don't remember what he's talking about for that either. But on the last time we visited granduncle, and we all went for ice cream, granduncle and the shopkeeper had been talking. She had called something tragic while shaking her head. Granduncle had drummed his fingers against a stained wooden counter, sighed and said something like, "Yeah, that mash deadly if you want to play the fool around it." The older shopkeeper had paused halfway through her turn to get granduncle's change, her green eyes staring right at him. She didn't say anything, and granduncle shifted his weight from one leg to the next. I'd come up to ask granduncle when we were going back to his home, and that had prompted the shopkeeper back into motion. While still glaring, she had slammed granduncle's change back on the counter and slid it towards him. Granduncle mumbled his goodbye before quickly ushering us both away. My brother had asked if the shopkeeper was okay since we didn't get our usual piece of bubblegum. Granduncle had just shook his head and said she didn't have any. He'd been lying. I had seen the half-full jar of it on the shelf above the shopkeeper's head, but I hadn't really cared to press the matter because my ice cream was melting in the evening sun. Before we turned onto granduncle's dirt track to his house, I turned back to see the shopkeeper out on the steps watching us walk down the street. She was holding an old cell phone to her ear and speaking. I had waved to her before we turned the bend, but I don't think she saw me because she never waved back. Late that night, when granduncle had come to tuck me and my brother into bed after letting us chase lightning bugs around his yard, I'd asked him about the shopkeeper. He ruffled my head, told me that maybe she was having a bad day and that some old people get moody sometimes. When I asked if he would get like that too, he made an odd face for a second before telling me to stop wishing bad health on his old age. That was such a weird night because later my brother had woken me up. That same night, he had shaken my shoulders violently and whisper shouted to get up. It was still dark out and I tried to ignore him. I only really roused when he said something was happening down by the marsh. Standing on top of my toes, I could just see out of the slits in the bedroom louvers. The pattern on the glass made everything outside distorted and blurry, but I reached over for the lever to open it properly. My brother smacked my hand away. He shushed me harshly again and told me to just watch, so I did. Although I could only just barely see outside at the time, it was enough. I knew on the other side of the glass slits it would be just a perfect view of the marshland with nothing obstructing it, so it had scared me badly to see a mist of blue and red lights through the glass where the marsh should be. With frightful tears already in my eyes, I asked my brother what he thought it was. My lips had started to tremble when he started talking about his friends at school said they saw on one of those American ghost hunting shows that sometimes spurs short like orbs of light. Scared as I was, I still looked out the window as best as I could. The red and blues mixing together but never turning into purple. It moved so strangely. The lights had looked like they were moving, but they only stayed in one spot, like how a dancer might twirl in one area. What did make me yelp in fright was when a shadow dashed right past our window, a sharp lanky figure cut out against the red and blue. Together, me and my brother burst out from the room, and granduncle had thrown open his door, already coming to us. When we told him about the lights and the shadow running past the window, he shushed us and brought us into the living room. He told us to keep quiet and away from windows because he wouldn't let any vengeful ghost or spirit come for us. Eventually, me and my brother fell asleep on granduncle's old couch while he watched us from the dining table. I think we were so rattled by the whole ordeal because our parents had showed up the next morning to pick us up, cutting our stay with granduncle a whole 4 days short. Can't say I remember being very pleased about that, but I've been placated on the promise that I'd get to come back soon and stay a whole week. Such a shame, but that 1 week stay never came to, and granduncle died only a few months later. When I was a child, nobody really told me what happened, only that I wouldn't be seeing granduncle anymore and that he was in a better place. And as an adult, I was finally told what happened. I was never told why we didn't get to go to the funeral though, and my parents still both refused to give a reason. Granduncle had been out on his little old boat in the marsh trying to catch fish. Since he was alone, no one knew for sure what had happened, but it seemed that he'd lost his balance and fell over the side of the water. He drowned in the marsh when one of his legs caught badly on some weeds growing on the bottom. It had wrapped around his legs like long, knotted up fingers. Dad said that's what Dad said when he thought back to the incident. It had been that little old shopkeeper lady who had come to check on him. He hadn't bought his usual supply of sugar and flour from her, so she came looking for him. When she saw the boat on the water and Granduncle's chickens suffering from starvation, she had called the authorities who pulled them out of the lake. His death was labeled as an accident. I came back to Granduncle's house recently. Dad wanted to sell the property since Granduncle left it to him, and he doesn't have a use for it. I came to check on everything, just to make sure no squatter had taken up residence or anything. Although I'd offered to drive my brother out there to see the place for the first time in years, he had vehemently refused to come. I was shocked. It was shocking to me when he declared he didn't want anything to do with the place and left me to my own devices. When I got to the house, it was overgrown and collapsing in some places. The chicken coop had been turned into a pile of rotten wood and rusted galvanized, and most of the louvers were now missing in all of the windows. Such a sad sight because I know Granduncle wouldn't have wanted his home to be reduced to this. A family of owls and vultures had taken up residence in the corpse of his old house. I had walked over to the marsh and looked out. It seemed much smaller now and so much more desolate. All those flowers and colored plants I remembered growing around the edges of the marsh were now gone. Instead, it seemed like birch-foot trefoil flowers had completely taken over, their yellow petals dazzling in the sunlight. Stepping in the muddy soil, I leaned over and peered into the water for a bit. A stray fish would dart out in and out of my shadow every so often, but my eyes caught on something. It was a strangely rounded bundle of algae from my childhood. The very same one that seemed to have spooked my granduncle. It moved languidly under the water, inching towards me, just like when I was a child. It was a strange, wispy thing, where some parts moved freely, but it all swayed together. It almost looked like the top of someone's head underwater. I straightened before it floated any closer, my mind reeling back to red and blue lights at the thought of a head floating through the water. Backing away from the edge of the marsh, I walked around the property one last time before leaving. I had pretended I didn't see Granduncle's old boat propped up against the back of the house, not wanting to think any more of his death. It was such a shame that I'd leave this place in fear the last 2 times I'd been here. I don't think Granduncle would be very happy that I was afraid of his house and his village, even though he died here. That was the end.
Hi, Randy Ablack. I'm reading 10 minutes of a story called Letting in the Jungle from a manuscript about the refinery shutdown. Letting in the jungle. Lester woke to the screaming. He'd nodded off briefly, waiting for the line to pressure. The bird sanctuary was under attack again, and that faint trill, that despairing wail, cutting through the clinging dew, was an indictment of every ear it begged. That anybody would put a wildfowl trust and a golf course next to an oil refinery was an odd idea, but he guessed it was good PR. It made sense too from the other side. For over 50 years, the refinery had funded the wild lifestyles and unorthodox breeding patterns of its many exotic birds. The wild Muscovy duck, the black-bellied whistling tree duck, the fulvous whistling duck, the white-cheeked pintail. He'd read the brochure, and so had all the MTS security guards. What would happen now that the refinery was down? Lester listened to the answer call out from the cold night. The guards told him that none of the ducks tasted any different. Lester Cornelius Batiste was the last man standing. For 2 years, the industrial estate had been mothballed. 16 separate units, so constructed as to modify crude oil into saleable product, had been put into purgatory, waiting on a fate unknown. start up, lease out, parts up, sell out. Who knew which whim? His duty was to keep nitrogen gas in the linework to prevent it from rusting. His job was to grease the gears of the great machine so that they would not seize up altogether. Lester was the last of the original operators who ran the plant. He was a clear 6'7", a big strapping Tobagonian, chosen for his strength, his experience, and his reliability. Lester joked to himself he would never be caught out for duck. Never, especially not in this kind of weather. He wasn't born yesterday. If he complained, if he woke the up and ups, if he made himself responsible for the birds' welfare, they would hold him accountable for their loss from that time onward. This was how the refinery fell. Do-gooders were doomed to fail in a world full of scoundrels. Nay, let the ducks bury the ducks. He had heard prettier birds sing, but still his life was now a lonely one. He had been maligned, castigated, and ridiculed in the earlies for holding on to his job, even on contract and half pay. Men, former workers, comrades all, were hurt and afraid. The union had led them on a merry march or hill and dale from Pointe-à-Pied to Port of Spain, promising to force the government's hand, to restart, to sell, to partner, to own. Nothing. Nothing worked. Nothing worked out. Eventually, the pandemic hit and all protests fizzled. Still, he had hoped, as they did, that somehow, somewhere, there was some malevolent plot, somebody with a plan, a scheme, a con, a kickback. The real face of some made-for-TV villain would be revealed, and some smart man waiting in the wings would swoop down, and half the country would sigh and say, "I can tell you so," and the other half would smile in secret admiration. That man have belly. No such messiah manifested. Only rust, not a single charlatan or crook appeared. Only more cobweb. In fact, the 28 years Lester had worked in the refinery now swirled around him in an unending tabanka. There was too much paper trailing in from the past. Skeletons grinning from the closets of old, newly unlocked offices. There, dismantling and dissembling in inscrutable acts of decay, was the documentation behind an act of promotion, or worse, a never explained prevention. There, the subterfuge behind a diabolical act of delay. Everywhere, around the corner, like rubbish, tumbles a retired memory trying to fix this mistake, trying to fix this refinery. There, the peeling paint, the cracking walls, the backgrounds before which real flesh and blood parade. Caved-in ceilings of lunchrooms where working men argue and jest, where they fight and measure, break bread and pontificated. All this Movilang and Picong mythology of his own making, all this Ozymandias, lying consecrated in a thick film of rust. This, an oil refinery where men had given their lives to each other, now filing down to mere rust. And rust never slept. Lester woke up once again to the scream, a long, egregious gargle, ending in a wry, plaintive hiccup, marred his nocturnal muse. They had started on the guinea fowl. When Lester was a child, the neighbor kept quite an inviting brood. Guinea fowl had a large grey coat the color of Guardian newsprint. Their dander aggravated his asthma, but they, serendipitously, were responsible for his love of reading. It was those very tiny grey feathers that caused the lengthy bouts of convalescence, which in turn fostered his nascent bibliophilia. He believed it even kept him this job. Lester's avian-induced introspection had ultimately blossomed into a reticent, self-aware stoicism in adulthood. He understood this. It was usually misread as obeisance. he was sure it had gotten him the work as an operator in the first place. The interviewers asked, might he use this job as a stepping stone to a university education? He leaned forward, cocked his chin, and glared. Textbook guinea fowl courtship. It worked. Still, creating a presence was half the equation. Focusing, remaining in the present, was ever the other half. Lester remembered to close the nitrogen on the line. It was an onerous task. Some of the pipelines were as long as a mile and as wide as a tree trunk. They were isolated by giant valves. He walked around with a huge, heavy spanner, dragging behind a solid rod of iron shaped like an F. The prongs of the spanner fit between the spoke of the valve wheels, and the long arm of the F leveraged the valve shut. As time went by, these valves had begun to leak. Last week, Lester was accused of deliberately damaging them, twisting the wheels with full rage to break their spindles. This, he mused again, was why the refinery fell. As the equipment began to age, they began to accuse their very own employees of misuse. Lester was chagrined that he, one such as he, who once supervised the production of $1 million plant, was now reduced to the mute of a mere laborer. Again, the guinea fowl cried out to its guinea fowl gods. None but an eerie silence replied. Lester understood the MTS guards' position. The guards were all small islanders, country boys like him, drawn from all over the Caribbean. Trinidad and Tobago, the most southerly isles of the Caribbean archipelago, were an oil-rich mecca. The guards willingly worked for minimum wage, were frequently rotated, temporarily hired, and summarily let go. Post-shutdown, management mistrusted most of the permanent staff, so they hired these greenhorns instead. By that time, anything that could be toted away had been unbolted and removed by the denizens of the neighboring villages. Air-conditioned units, electronics, small pumps, small baths, scrap iron, and copper cables had mysteriously floated over the Guacara River, the only river in the Twin Island Republic to have ever caught fire. But precedent had been set. The word was out. Here was a movable feast. There was no one to guard the guards.
Hi everyone. Today I will be reading part of my story called The Waxy. It had nothing I hated more than going market with Aji when I was small. She had me out in the hot sun walking all over the Cocoville market early, like I had nothing better to do. Normally, Ma would go by 1 or 2 stores because she know the vendors there and she liked to support the people she know. But Aji just go by every single vendor I have and compare crops until she decide who have the better ones and buy from them. By the time we done, it's because we walk the whole market just watching and only buying when she walking back up the road after she see everything. And would you believe, she didn't even pick me up and carry me when I tell she I just be too tired to walk the rest of the way. Like she and her little children get tired fast, especially in boring places like the market. At least Ma used to hook me on she hip and carry me when I say I tired. But in all my days prancing the market with Aji, it had one day I was lucky enough to have the adventure of my life. Aji was hunting for a proper piece of pumpkin, even though we passed 4 vendors already who had plenty to sell. I don't know why she was so picky. It's not like Aja care if the thing too soft or too hard. He would have eat the thing anyway. But Aji didn't care. So she dragged me all over that market, looking for this piece of pumpkin until she finally see a good enough piece hiding out by an old man down in the last room. She grabbed my hand and pulled me so hard, it was a damn near miracle it didn't detach from the rest of my body. I wasn't really taking on Aji and she veggie talk with that mister, you know. So I sat to watch all over. The whole place was noisy. I fed up here 2 pounds for $5 and the tall man who does only be saying I am selling Simo's whole thing. Like he record sticker. And the whole place was smelling funky. Lord, I could never explain how vexed I used to be when she dragged my little tail out there to supper. I feel she didn't like me now, to have me in a place like that so long. As I go to turn to pull on her skirt to see if she's ready to go home, out the corner of my eyes, I see a tall, skinny, bareback man pelting her down the market road. Well, boy, I don't know what take over me, but I run down the aisle passing all the vendors until I reach the pavement. As I reach, I could see the bareback man at the end of the street. He cargo short pants hanging low on the waist, showing off his plaid boxers. I think my father had that same pair home. He was facing my direction, watching down the street where he now run from. Before I could turn to see what it is he watching so, I hear a set of old noise coming from down the road. When I do so, it's because the bareback man had the whole of Cocoville police station pelting it down the market road, waving the big stick in the air and yelling for he to stay right where he is. Well, from the time I see them fellas in the uniform, I get frightened one time. I turn to see if the man was frightened too. But imagine my surprise when I see him grinning from ear to ear, jumping from one foot to the other and laughing like a madman. I say, like this man going off. I don't know if it's because of how ridiculous the whole scene was or because of how jokey he was looking. But before I could catch myself, I start to laugh too. Like he had super hearing or something, because the next thing I know, the man stopped everything and turned his head until we eyes make four. He stand up straight like a pin, grin still on his face, and he watched me for a few seconds before he wink and make a dash for the main road. A chicken truck was passing same time and almost bounced him down, but he didn't business now. Before I even realized, I take off at a speed behind the man, watching he dip and out of traffic until he run on the busy sidewalk, my eyes never leaving his sweaty back. When he make the bend by the doubles man on Freeman corner, I use up my last bit of energy and run as fast as I could behind him. My eyes squeeze almost start closed, hands ball up in a fist like I go in and fight somebody. I was concentrating so hard on running, I didn't even realize the madman stopped until I slammed into something hard and slippery. When I step back and watch up, it's because I ran into the bareback madman from behind. He just turned slow, watched me, and bust out in a big grin. All of a sudden, the police come out of nowhere and pounce on the man, pelting him down flat on the ground and start to beat him with a big stick. He grin never leave his face, even with all the licks he was collecting. Something really was wrong with him, because anytime I had to collect licks, it was level cry. I get so frightened, I throw down myself on the sidewalk right there and start to bawl. A police officer had to come and pick me up and ask me what happened to me and where my mother. But I was bawling so hard I couldn't tell the man nothing. I don't know where Aji come out from, but next thing I know, she grabbed me from the policeman and asking he a whole set of questions. I don't really know what happened after that. All I can remember is Aji turning to walk back where we come from, and I raised up my head from she shoulder in time to see the policeman hoisting up the bareback man. He face covered in sweat and red water. Somehow we eyes meet again, but this time he wasn't grinning no more. He looked proper vexed, screaming a whole set of words towards Aji back that I couldn't understand. I could only make out he calling she a old yard fowl. But I didn't know that was a bad thing until I was talking to her and she bust a slap on my face for saying Aji was one old yard fowl. Back then, I didn't realize the bacchanal that would eventually unleash when the truth behind that bareback man connection to the family was revealed. But that mark didn't bust until years later. Thank you.
Alright, thank you. I'll be reading from my short story, Reminders. Chloe stood on the edge of the step that led down into the engagement party. It was as though she were on a precipice, staring into an abyss of familiar faces that would soon regard her with raised eyebrows and frantic whispers. An old man approached her, arms outstretched, his gold tooth flashing in a grin. Chloe fell into his arms. She barely noticed the hush that fell over the room and rested her head on the man's shoulder, his hand patting her back. He smelled familiar, a mixture of Old Spice and coffee with a hint of peppermint oil. The two broke apart. The man took a step back, admiring her. She twirled. Beautiful as ever. You saw me last week, Uncle Clyde? Yes, and last week, like today, like every time I see you in the past 5 years, you, my favorite girl, are always a vision. Uncle Clyde hugged her again. Chloe laughed into his ear, feeling safe and loved in his arms. Look how you reached here again, eh? I know my brother had the way. But if Lennox was here, he'd have loved to see you too. But we are going to talk about that now. Let me get you a little apple juice there. You know, in a Christian household, it have no rum here. Uncle Clyde bounced off, taking the warmth with him. It was mid-April, but at that moment it felt like a cold December breeze had swept through the party. The chatter that she had not registered earlier came at her now. Chloe curled inward, a sudden weakness in her legs, as she properly surveyed the people around her. Some were smiling at her awkwardly, others averted their gaze. A group of old ladies seated in a corner stared at her. One of the old bats, slightly hunched over and close to death, even made a sign of the cross. Aaron's male cousins whispered behind their hands and pointed at her, giggling like schoolgirls. Chloe wanted to hide, but that wasn't an option really. Curtis had never let these people see him sweat. She had come here for a reason. This was to be expected, and she wasn't about to let these guests, who don't matter, get to her. Chloe tossed her braids over her shoulder and smiled. Stop that. Oh gosh, you never seen a woman before? Mildred, study your husband and stop watching she so. Uncle Clyde snapped at different guests as he pranced over to Chloe, 2 glasses in his hand. She took one and they toasted to overcoming bad mind, then began swaying to the music. Chloe felt so connected for the first time since she had arrived. For Curtis, his Uncle Clyde had been who he wanted to be when he grew up. Clyde was the last of his father's living siblings. Never married, he changed careers as often as he changed lovers. His nephews and nieces were like his children, and he was there for every important life event. Uncle Clyde was the first to really see Curtis, and had even paid to cover all the expenses when he had gone away. Oh my God, Chloe! Nicole squealed, running up to her and hugging her tightly around the waist, her head barely touching her chin. Chloe patted her awkwardly on the back, forcing a smile in Aaron's direction as he came up behind his fiancée. Oh gosh, give the girl a chance to breathe now, Uncle Clyde teased. Uncle! Nicole hugged Uncle Clyde now, rocking him from side to side. Alright, all this rocking giving me vertigo, girl. The 4 of them laughed as Nicole, still smiling giddily, stepped back to take her place at Aaron's side. How's my favorite bride to be? Oh my God, Chloe, I am so flippin' excited I could curse. I always knew Ari and I would get married and have children and whatever else, but it is actually happening, oh my God. And Mama Helen has been the best. She's so helpful and nice and really fashionable, just like you. Oh my God, you should come dress shopping with us, she would love that. I doubt that, Miss Thing. Nicole clasped her hands over her mouth, horrified. Aaron pulled her close, rubbing her back. I'm so sorry, Chloe, I always put my foot in my mouth. Before Chloe could let her know that it was all right, she heard the sound of high heels on tiles and smelled the flowery perfume worn by the matriarch of the family, Aaron and Curtis's mother, Lennox's widow, Uncle Clyde's sister-in-law, Nicole's mama, and Chloe's reason for being here, Miss Helen. Miss Helen wore a peach thigh-length dress with capped sleeves and matching 4-inch heels. Her hair coiffed into an updo, her favorite pearls hung around her neck. There was an air about her. Clearly, she had just vacated her seat at the right hand of God to sup with mere mortals and bathe them in the light of the Lord that shone so brightly in her. She moved through the crowd, nodding here and extending a hand there. It wasn't until she got to the head table and turned around that she saw Chloe standing there. The only signs that Miss Helen had aged in the past 5 years since Chloe had seen her were the saggy skin on her neck, the wrinkles around her ruby red lips, and the tiny crow's feet in the corner of her eyes that were scrutinizing every inch of Chloe. But who ruffled Mary Magdalene wings today? Mumbled Uncle Clyde. Chloe heard him from far away, for she had returned to Curtis's hospital room, watching as he tried to reason with his mother. Miss Helen shook her head, muttering a psalm, and refused to listen. Instead, she pushed a chair away from his bed and dipped into her purse, taking out a small bottle of olive oil that she carried at all times for spontaneous healing. Aaron, Nicole, come, Miss Helen called, pulling Chloe back to the present. The couple excused themselves and went up to join her. Miss Helen cleared her throat. Welcome. It is truly a pleasure to have you here with us on this special occasion. Proverbs 18:22 tells us, he who finds a wife finds what is good and receives favor from the Lord. Amen. Amen. Let us pray. Chloe closed her eyes and went back to the hospital room. Miss Helen was hastily administering olive oil to the top of Curtis's head and forehead, moving to his eyelids, the tip of his nose, lips, and earlobes. Then she anointed his elbows, wrists, knuckles, knees, ankles, and toes. She put some in her hands, rubbed them together furiously, and breathed into them 3 times, whispering a quick word. Miss Helen bent slightly, placed one hand on her son's stomach, over his liver, and the other on his forehead. She looked him straight in the eye. I am your mother. My God is an awesome God. He will save you from this transformation nonsense. Before Curtis could respond, she started praying. She asked that the Lord touch him from the crown of his head to the sole of his feet, that he be doused in the healing balm of Gilead and made whole, that her second-born son see the error of his ways and repent, that he not go down such a dark and dangerous path, for his soul will be damned, that her miracle son forget the world and return to the light, that he accept he was made in his image and likeness, that Curtis should remain. So powerful was her conviction, her body shook, and sweat cascaded from her forehead as she spoke in tongues filled with the Holy Spirit. Amen, said the congregation. Chloe opened her eyes with a start. Her heart was pounding against her chest while the room danced before her eyes. She hastily put her half-filled glass on a side table and was about to tell Clyde that she was going to the bathroom when she realized Miss Helen had left the head table and was coming in her direction. Chloe pushed her hair out of her face, rubbed her lips together, passed her tongue over her teeth, adjusted the neckline, and smoothed the front of her dress, waiting for a chance to talk. But could she? The last time Chloe tried talking to her, she was met by her walking away, promising to deliver her son from this wickedness. Even so, Curtis was gone now, which meant that Chloe needed to be seen and heard. Miss Helen was so close now. Chloe gripped Uncle Clyde's arm and held her breath, only to watch as Miss Helen walked past her for a second time. It was like a punch to her gut. All her effort in finding the right dress and makeup, in making sure she was perfect, had gone unnoticed. Miss Helen would never see her. She smiled bitterly, embraced Uncle Clyde, and mumbled a goodbye. But where you going? Home, Uncle Clyde, I'm tired. Going home, not going to sort shit, you hear? Uncle Clyde grabbed her hand and looked her dead in the eye. Listen, Curtis gone for 5 years now and he ain't coming back. But you here, and it's time Helen realized that. Today, Chloe, you're going to talk to your mother. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. I would be reading from my book of short stories, soon to be published in the UK. The story is called Days of Armageddon. All them big boys in the Red House from putting up a joint police and soldier camp at the back of the compound. According to the government, it was a peaceful gesture. If the Caliph had nothing to hide and they really want peace and love, he would leave the army and police there. After all, they had stopped raiding or interfering on the compound. They were there for everyone's safety. Police raids had stopped and the army was cool. Well, the Caliph not falling for that cock-and-bull tale, he said. He big team of lawyers from the Queen's Land only dropping lawsuit after lawsuit on the government, the army chief, and anybody else. The Caliph failed to drop lawsuit on. Everybody in court closed right through. He wanted the soldiers and police removed from the land. And so it went for some more time, back and forth, court bacchanal, and more with the Caliph and the government. The government was arguing that they were not on the compound, since that piece of land was not on the compound's deed. Imagine the camp was next to the yard. The house was at the back of the compound. I used to sit down on a stool by my bedroom window upstairs and pet pebbles at the soldiers. I make it bounce on the ground and hit them on their calves. Sometimes I would see them looking at me after and shaking their head like, nah, she didn't pelt me. I'm gonna be mash a stone and a pitcher. They never saw it coming. I used to smile and wave anytime I see them watching me. But the government finally lost one in the Privy Court in the Queen's Land, and the order was to remove the soldiers. They didn't follow the order. The Caliph kept up the protest and things get more out of hand. After a while, Caliph and Abidem was really pissed. Some of the soldiers started to only chat the women, and Muslim are not putting up with that. Then his police raids like rain in wet season on the compound. Some of them boys getting licks like peas. Scarface, they take him down to the station for questioning. He ended up dead while in police custody. The police say he tried to attack an officer with an unknown object that he pulled from his pocket while in custody. An officer fired at him, headshot. The object that he had attacked them was still unknown up to today. Not to mention that he was in handcuffs when he pulled the object. That set a darker cloud on the compound and it finished fall from there. On the 9th or 8th December 1989, the mood at the compound got even more dismal. The entire community went into shock when the news that Brother Abdul Kamal, a much-loved member of the compound, as well as the agricultural teacher, and a man who was widely known in many other circles as peacemaker and African cultural icon for the promotion of we people and culture. He had been stabbed to death while in police custody in St. Peter's. That silence was again unknown. He even butted heads with the Caliph a couple times over things he did not agree with. One thing all compound members did learn sooner or later was you never find yourself butting heads with the Caliph. Let me sidestep here and show all you why. Once a higher member that was praying in his house, he wasn't living on the compound at that time. Two angels in the form of gunmen appeared to him at his front window downstairs and overflowed some high-power corn from the Lord. He was in a coma for about 2 weeks and never walked again in his life. He was spirited out of the country to our next land, never to return to Sweet Trini. His wife and children left too. So anyway, as I was telling earlier, Brother Abdul Kamal had gone to St. Peter's for roti. Apparently he did not go to the roti shop that he usually went to. Instead, he went to the worst roti shop in the worst street in St. Peter's with all the ills of society happening there. This was surprising to some, given how careful Brother Abdul Kamal was about where he ate and the places he frequented. He was standing on the pavement on the street when he was arrested on the charge of suspicion or of loitering, or whatever choice you want to make between these two. The police could not make up their mind which one it was. They were on patrol, as that is a trouble area, and stopped as he was looking like he was doing suspicious activities, whatever that is. And as they were taking him into custody, unfortunately, someone ran up to him and stabbed him. Well, don't shoot the messenger now. I just saying what the police say. Don't ask me how a man run up and stab up a next man over 24 times while the police with big guns taking the victim into their custody. And the assailant had time to get away, too. Of course, they pursued him, but they were unable to apprehend or arrest him or her. They wasn't sure if it was a man or woman either. The other version of this tale was that the police saw him on the other street when he usually went for his roti. They stopped him and got him into the van. Eyewitnesses say he was not forced or he did not refuse. The police spoke to him, he complied, and then they drove away with him. After this, his demise followed. Anyhow, there was an investigation into the matter. 2 policemen were charged for kidnapping and or wrongful arrest and obstruction of justice and what have you, but nobody was charged for murder. And none of them did jail time. The case got thrown out under some technicality. I could still see his body by the Voodoo area, getting bailed and wrapped for burial. Even the cattle on the compound mourning the death of the man who used to take care of them. As them was watching his body, the cattle come up right in the yard, moving loud. People trying to run them in the back where they usually was, and none of them moving. I swear there was tears in their eyes. The compound was a ghost hall after that, and then a storm came and raised the dead. After the shooting of Scarface and then the death of Brother Kamal, the Caliph held the biggest rally they ever had. The place locked down and then them walked through town the day of Brother Kamal's funeral with the body. They do the janazah on the compound and then drive to town and walk back from town to the cemetery that was opposite the compound. Real cars driving behind them, blowing horn, even the cows walking too. Man, woman and children in the melee shouting, "Justice for Scarface and Kamal." Placards and the whole yard of embellishment in the melee. Police and soldiers like bumblebee in rows on the street. But they ain't interfering, just moving with the procession. When funeral finished, man acting like wild animals. Brothers showing talk for the police and some of them brothers, women and children bawling and crying. The Caliph on a loudspeaker booming out, "Martyrdom is better than oppression." But all good things must come to an end. Somebody pick up a stone and fell behind the police and soldiers in the cemetery. Well, Bonje is back and I'll break out. Batter and guns come out. His licks for soup. police and shoulders share that day. A whole side of the brothers get locked up and everybody passing the madness. Some of the children get lashed in the confusion. Tear gas and rubber bullets start to share too. Some brothers decide it's war, so they're fighting back. It was a scramble to get all the women and children. Then police and them locked down the cemetery. They let the women and children pass out and then they deal even more brutal with them brothers. Colin, my brother, he did tell me his roasting went on there. After, way man, you feel it was heat as hell. And them police saying we done in the cemetery, choose a hole. There's enough baton, kick, cuff, gun butt, bust head, break teeth, jaw fracture, break ribs and concussion shape. Line in the hospital like people going for doubles on Saturday morning. Man, that night the compound was a hospital in a war zone. A bunch of badly wounded licking their wounds. That was Bloody Friday. But little did we know that the next 3 Fridays to come was the Friday of all times. Anyhow, that Friday, after Juma, it was a normal Friday, Friday the 27th of July, 1990. Nobody do nothing different. School was on holiday. We had only come from Alma to go Juma because we usually spend the holidays with Grandma. But Abby used to insist on we coming for Juma since Grandma was a kafir and not up to his standards. But I should really read down to his standards, eh? Anyway, just after Juma, we left for Alma. But Khalid and Abby didn't come with us. Abby said they had the usual meeting before Astor in the square. So he let me uncle come for we. And well, all you know the rest. It was Fido dancing on TV, and then more hell for we. Who and we crow. I was 16 then, I remember well. Quick crack, monkey breaky back in the old hamster for a piece of pomera.